You think grief breaks you. But what really shatters your soul is realizing the people you gave your life to will gladly throw you away the moment you're no longer useful. The day I buried my husband, the man I spent 55 years beside, I thought my son was driving me home to grieve in peace. Instead, he pulled onto a dirt road far from town, looked me in the eye, and said, "This is where you get off." That was the moment I knew my son no longer saw me as his mother, but as baggage. But what he didn't know was that the woman he tried to discard had more fight in her than he could ever imagine. Part 1: The Funeral and the Ride. The church was filled with lilies, their sweet scent almost suffocating. I sat in the front pew, dressed in black, clutching the folded flag they'd handed me at the graveside. My husband, Robert, had been a veteran. A proud man. A good man. He'd loved his country, but he'd loved me even more. As the final hymn faded, I felt the weight of loneliness settle in my chest. 55 years of shared mornings, dinners, and whispered secrets, all gone in a coffin lowered into the earth. When the service ended, people filtered out, offering murmured condolences. I barely registered their words. My son Michael placed a hand on my shoulder. "Come on, Mom," he said gently. "Let's get you home." I looked up at him, relief flickering in my chest. At least I had Michael. He was my only child. Surely he wouldn't let me face this emptiness alone. We walked to his car, a sleek black sedan that smelled faintly of leather and cologne. He opened the passenger door, and I sank into the seat, clutching the flag tightly against me. For a while, we drove in silence. The streets grew less familiar, the houses thinning into fields and dirt roads. I frowned. "Michael," I said softly, "this isn't the way home." He kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight. "We need to talk, Mom." Something in his tone made my stomach twist. We drove for another 10 minutes before he pulled onto a narrow dirt road lined with trees. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and red. He stopped the car and shifted into park. My heart pounded. "Why are we here?" He turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Mom, you can't stay in that house anymore. It's too much for you. Dad's gone. You're not strong enough to be on your own." I blinked at him, shocked. "Michael, I've lived in that house for 40 years. It's my home." He shook his head. "It's not safe. And besides, Rachel and I talked about it. We think it's time you moved into a care facility." I felt my breath catch. "A nursing home? Michael, I don't need that. I can take care of myself." His eyes hardened. "Mom, this is where you get off." He gestured toward the trees outside. "We'll figure out the rest later. But you can't go back. Rachel already has plans for the house." For a moment, the world tilted. My own son. On the very day I buried his father, the man who had raised him, loved him, sacrificed everything for him, he was casting me aside like garbage. Tears stung my eyes. "Michael, how could you?" He didn't answer. He just gripped the wheel, staring straight ahead. I opened the car door slowly, my legs trembling as I stepped out onto the dirt road. The cool evening air wrapped around me. I clutched the flag tighter, the last piece of Robert I had left. The door slammed behind me. Gravel crunched as the car pulled away, tail lights disappearing into the distance. I stood there alone, my heart shattered. But in that silence, a thought came to me. If Michael believed this was the end of me, he had underestimated me. Because I wasn't just Robert's widow. I wasn't just a discarded old woman. I was a wife who had built a life from nothing. I was a mother who had endured labor, sickness, sacrifice. I was a woman who knew how to survive. And now, I would learn how to fight. I turned toward the long road ahead, clutching the folded flag against my chest. Each step I took in the dusk was fueled by a new fire. Michael thought he'd left me to crumble. But what he didn't realize was that he had lit the spark of my revenge. And one day soon, that spark would burn everything he and Rachel were trying to steal. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I shuffled forward, clutching the folded flag to my chest. The night air grew colder, and the orange glow of sunset faded into gray. My heart was heavy, not just with grief, but with the cruel realization that the only son I had raised, the boy I had once rocked to sleep, had left me to fend for myself like a stray dog. I walked for what felt like miles, my body aching with every step. My mind replayed the moment, his words, "This is where you get off." I whispered them bitterly into the night, as if saying them out loud would strip them of their sting. The road was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves. I didn't know where I was going. All I knew was that I had to keep moving. I had to find my way back, not just to town, but to myself. A pair of headlights appeared in the distance. For a moment, panic clutched me. Was Michael coming back? Had he changed his mind? But no, the headlights slowed as the vehicle approached, then stopped a few feet ahead of me. A truck door opened, and a familiar voice called, "Clara? Is that you?" I squinted. Relief washed over me when I recognized the figure stepping into the beam of light. It was Hank, my neighbor from 2 streets over. A widower himself, Hank was a tall man in his early 80s with thinning white hair and a permanent stoop, but his voice still carried strength. "Hank," I breathed, tears springing to my eyes. "What on earth are you doing out here?" he asked, hurrying toward me. His flashlight illuminated my face, and his expression darkened as he took in my trembling body. "My son." My voice cracked. "He left me here." Hank's jaw tightened. Without another word, he helped me into his truck, set the folded flag carefully in my lap, and started the engine. We rode in silence for a while, the hum of the engine filling the empty night. Finally, Hank spoke. "I'm sorry, Clara. I know Michael's been distant. But to leave you out here like this? After Robert's funeral?" His voice was rough with disbelief. I stared out the window, my throat tight. "I don't know what I did wrong, Hank. We gave him everything. Robert worked double shifts for years so Michael could go to college. I sewed his prom suit by hand. And now, I'm nothing more than a burden." "You're not a burden," Hank said firmly. "He's the one who's lost his way. But mark my words, Clara, greed and selfishness don't last. They rot from the inside out." His words struck something in me. Maybe I had been too blinded by grief to see it, but Hank was right. Michael wasn't motivated by concern for me. He was motivated by something else, something uglier. When Hank dropped me at my house, he insisted on walking me inside. The air was stale and heavy with silence, the absence of Robert palpable in every corner. Hank placed a hand on my shoulder. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly. "If you need anything, rides, groceries, even just company, you call me." I nodded, overwhelmed by his kindness. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the folded flag before me. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were loud. Michael and Rachel already had plans for the house, that much he had admitted. I reached for my leather notebook, the same one I had carried since Robert's passing. I flipped to a fresh page and wrote, "November 7th, betrayal confirmed. Michael wants me out of the house. Rachel has plans. Left me on the roadside after Robert's funeral. Rescued by Hank. Must uncover their true intentions." I underlined the last sentence 3 times. The next morning, I went about my usual routine, making oatmeal, tidying up, walking out to the mailbox. My hands trembled as I opened the small stack of envelopes. Bills. Bank statements. And one letter from the county clerk's office, addressed to me and Robert. I opened it carefully. It was a property tax statement, stamped past due. My stomach dropped. Robert had always handled the taxes, and after his illness, I hadn't been keeping up. But the amount owed seemed higher than expected. Later that afternoon, I carried the letter to Hank's porch. He looked at it, frowning. "That's strange. Taxes don't usually jump like this unless," his voice trailed off, and his brow furrowed, "unless someone filed changes with the deed." I stared at him, stunned. "Changes? But the house is in Robert's and my name." Hank nodded slowly. "Could be worth checking at the courthouse. Just to be sure." The idea sent a chill through me. Why would Michael want me out of the house so quickly? Why had Rachel been so eager to talk about plans? That evening, I wrote in my notebook. Suspicion, Michael and Rachel tampering with house deed. Must verify. Motive, greed. The following day, I put on my best coat and walked to the bus stop. It had been years since I'd gone downtown, but I still remembered the way. The courthouse was a stern old building with marble floors and dusty windows. A young clerk greeted me at the records desk. "How can I help you today?" I swallowed, nerves rattling in my chest. I'd like to check the deed for my property. 312 Meadow Lane. The clerk typed quickly, then frowned. It looks like there was an addendum filed 2 weeks ago. Ownership transferred from Robert and Clara Wallace to Michael Wallace. The words punched the air from my lungs. Transferred. Yes, ma'am. It says here both owners consented. My hands shook. But Robert was already gone. And I never signed anything. The clerk tilted the screen so I could see. There it was, my name scrawled on a digital line. But it wasn't my handwriting. It was forged. I stumbled out of the courthouse, my knees weak. My son, my only son, had stolen the house from me. By the time I got home, the grief had transformed into something else entirely. Fire. I sat at the kitchen table, the tax letter and courthouse records spread before me, and opened my notebook again. Confirmed, deed altered. Signature forged. Michael and Rachel plan to take house. Ultimate betrayal. I pressed the pen so hard into the page it nearly tore through. For a long time, I stared at the photo of Robert on the mantel. His smile, frozen in time, seemed to whisper the same thing Hank had said: greed rots from the inside out. But sometimes, I thought bitterly, rot needed a little help to be exposed. That night, as the wind howled outside, I made myself a vow. Michael and Rachel thought they had thrown me away. They thought I'd vanish quietly into some nursing home, leaving them free to gut the life Robert and I built. But I wasn't finished. They had declared war on my dignity. And I would answer. The courthouse discovery haunted me through the night. Forged. My own son had stolen my house with the flick of a pen, using my name like a weapon. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the folded flag on one side and my leather notebook on the other. The ticking clock echoed through the empty rooms. I flipped to a new page and wrote in big letters. Phase 1, Evidence. If I had learned anything from Robert over the years, it was this: you never march into battle without knowing your enemy's weaknesses. Michael and Rachel thought I was frail, grieving, blind. But I had lived nearly 8 decades. I knew how to wait, how to watch, how to let people expose themselves. Now, I just needed proof. The next morning, I walked to Hank's house with the courthouse papers tucked under my coat. He was out back trimming his rose bushes, his breath puffing in the crisp November air. Hank, I said softly, handing him the papers. It's worse than we thought. He adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents. His face darkened. Lord Almighty. They forged your name. I knew Michael was distant, but to steal from me? My voice trembled. On the very day I buried Robert. Hank set the papers down gently on the garden bench. Clara, you can't fight this alone. We'll need records, bank transfers, copies of the deed, anything that shows your signature was faked. I know a man down at the county who owes me a favor. He might help us pull certified copies. I gripped his hand, my eyes stinging. Thank you, Hank. He shook his head. Don't thank me yet. You've got a long road ahead. That afternoon, I opened the old oak chest in the bedroom where Robert and I kept important papers. My fingers brushed against faded deeds, insurance policies, tax receipts, all carefully filed over the years. I laid them out on the bed, comparing the signatures. Robert's bold scrawl. My own neat, slanted hand. And then the one on the courthouse document, clumsy, uneven, a mockery of my handwriting. I photographed everything with the little phone Hank had convinced me to get after Robert's death. My hands trembled, but each click of the camera steadied me. Evidence. Piece by piece. That evening, the phone rang. Michael. I hesitated before answering. Mom, he said, his tone rehearsed. I wanted to check in. How are you holding up? I almost laughed at the hypocrisy. I'm managing, I replied coolly. That's good, he said quickly. Listen. Rachel and I were thinking, maybe it's time you considered assisted living. We found a really nice place. Great staff, lots of activities. You wouldn't be alone. I pressed my lips together. Is that what you really want for me, Michael? To be tucked away? He sighed. It's what's best, Mom. You'll be safe, and Rachel and I can handle the house. It's too much for you. Handle the house. My chest tightened. So that was their plan, move me out, move themselves in, and live off the legacy Robert and I built with our bare hands. I'll think about it, I lied. When I hung up, I opened my notebook and wrote. Michael pressing, assisted living. Rachel pushing. Motive, possession of house. Timing, soon. Must accelerate plan. Over the next week, I played the part of the fragile widow. I shuffled slowly down the driveway when Michael dropped by. I let Rachel bring her clipped sympathy and veiled insults. You shouldn't strain yourself with cooking, Clara, she said one afternoon, setting a store-bought casserole on my counter. At your age, it's better to let others handle things. I smiled faintly. You may be right. Inside, my stomach churned. When they left, I wrote in my notebook. Rachel condescending. Blind to resistance. Weakness, arrogance. Hank came by one evening carrying a brown envelope. Clara, he said, lowering his voice, I've got the certified deed copy. And here, he pulled out another sheet, the notary record. The date they claim you signed? You were at Robert's bedside in the hospital. I was there, remember? I nodded, my throat tight. That's your alibi, Hank continued. If this goes to court, the forgery won't stand. I gripped his hand again. You don't know what this means to me. He looked at me steadily. I do. And Robert would want you to fight. The next day, I decided it was time to plant the first seed. Rachel had another of her little luncheons, parading her wealth in front of her friends. I baked a pie and walked over, setting it gently on the counter. Clara, how thoughtful, one of the women exclaimed. Rachel forced a smile. Yes, isn't she sweet? I sat quietly at the edge of the table, sipping tea. The conversation turned to home renovations, vacations, new purchases. Rachel bragged about a designer handbag, her friends nodding politely. Finally, one asked, So Rachel, when are you two moving into Clara's house? I thought you mentioned it before. Rachel's smile faltered. Oh well, we're still figuring it out. I tilted my head. That's news to me, I said gently, loud enough for the table to hear. I was never asked. But I suppose it's easy to make plans when you think someone won't notice. The room grew still. Rachel's cheeks flushed. She laughed too quickly. Oh, Clara's just joking. But her friends exchanged glances. The first doubt had been sown. That night, in my notebook I wrote. Planted doubt among Rachel's circle. Outcome, effective. Must continue exposure carefully. Michael called again 2 days later. His voice was strained. Mom, Rachel says you embarrassed her in front of her friends. What's going on? I kept my tone calm. I only said what was true. You've made plans without me. There was a long silence. Then he said, You're being difficult. Or perhaps, I murmured, I'm being clear. When I hung up, I pressed my hand over Robert's folded flag. He had always said I had more backbone than people realized. He was right. That weekend, I invited Margaret, another old friend from the neighborhood, over for coffee. I showed her the deed, the forged signature, the notary record. Her eyes widened. Clara, this is criminal. You have to go to the police. Not yet, I said firmly. First, I want them exposed. Not just legally, but socially. They thrive on image. I'll take that from them first. Margaret nodded slowly. Then you'll need allies. I already have you, I said with a smile. And Hank. She patted my hand. Then you're not alone, Clara. Let's make them regret underestimating you. That night, I wrote in my notebook. Evidence gathered. Allies in place. Community doubts planted. Next phase, confrontation by exposure. I closed the book, my hand firm on the cover. Michael thought he had ended me on that lonely dirt road. But all he had done was set me on a path toward a revenge that would leave him wishing he had never uttered those words. This is where you get off. The first frost of winter had begun to creep across the windows in the mornings. I sat by the fireplace with my leather notebook, the firelight catching the edges of the forged documents Hank had retrieved. My hand trembled only slightly as I underlined the words, Phase 2, Exposure. Michael and Rachel had built their lives like actors on a stage. Clothes, cars, luncheons, polished smiles. They thrived on appearance. And I knew from experience that sometimes, when you can't fight someone head-on, you break them where they live, in their pride. The next afternoon, I made my way to the market. The small-town grocery was always buzzing with chatter, mothers gossiping in the produce aisle, older men lingering by the coffee counter. I carried my basket slowly, stopping to exchange polite greetings. "Oh, Clara," one woman said, pausing by the potatoes. "How are you holding up since Robert's passing?" I gave her a tired smile, taking it one day at a time. "Though things have been complicated." Her eyebrows lifted. "Complicated?" I lowered my voice just enough. "Michael and Rachel have been busy making plans for my house. I only just found out." The woman's eyes widened, her lips parting. "Surely not." I shook my head, the faintest sadness in my voice. "It seems grief isn't enough. Some people want to take more than what's theirs." By the time I left the store, I knew that single seed would take root. In a town like ours, whispers traveled faster than the wind. That evening, Michael called. "Mom, what did you say at the store?" His voice was sharp, almost panicked. "Rachel ran into Lisa, and she said you've been spreading rumors." I held the phone to my ear calmly. "I only spoke the truth." "You're making us look bad," he snapped. A cold laugh escaped me. "Michael, you don't need my help for that." There was a long silence. Then he muttered something under his breath and hung up. I sat back in my chair, satisfied. The tighter they tried to hold their image, the quicker it would slip through their fingers. Rachel's next luncheon was more subdued. I noticed at the moment I stepped through the door with another pie. Her friends weren't as eager, their laughter quieter, their eyes sharper as they looked at her. Rachel plastered on a smile. "Clara, how kind of you to join us again." I set the pie on the counter and took a seat near the edge of the table. As the women sipped their wine, one of them asked innocently, "So Rachel, are you really moving into Clara's house?" Rachel froze, her glass mid-air. "Excuse me?" The woman shrugged. "People are talking." Rachel forced a laugh, her cheeks pink. "Of course not. Clara's just confused. She's been under a lot of stress since Robert passed." Her friends exchanged glances. That's when I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady. "I may be grieving, but I'm not confused. Michael himself told me Rachel already has plans for the house." The room went still. Rachel's face drained of color, her smile slipping. "Clara, that's enough," she hissed. But the damage was done. Her friends would carry that moment with them. Later that night, I wrote in my notebook. "Rachel forced to deny. Social doubt spreading. Their foundation cracking." A few days later, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a glossy brochure for a luxury assisted living facility, with a sticky note that read, "We think this is best. Love, Michael and Rachel." I stared at it for a long time, fury simmering in my veins. They wanted me gone, erased, replaced by their designer furniture and their shallow lives. Instead of tearing the brochure up, I tucked it into my notebook as another piece of evidence. Proof of their intentions. Hank stopped by that evening, bringing fresh rolls from the bakery. As we sat at the kitchen table, I showed him the brochure. "They're accelerating," I said grimly. "The more people whisper, the more desperate they become." Hank nodded. "That's when people make mistakes. You just have to be ready to catch them." I gave him a thin smile. "Oh, I'll be ready." The Betrayal break came the following week. I was walking Max, Hank's old retriever, when I spotted Rachel in town. She was at the bank, her posture stiff as she argued with the teller. I lingered just out of sight, pretending to fuss with the dog's leash. "I told you, transfer the account into both our names," Rachel snapped, her voice tight. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wallace," the teller said politely, "but without your mother-in-law's authorization we can't." Rachel glanced around, lowering her voice. "She won't be around much longer. Just do it." My blood ran cold. When she finally stormed out, I walked in, heart pounding. The teller, a young man I'd seen since he was a boy, looked up and smiled kindly. "Mrs. Wallace, what can I do for you?" I leaned on the counter, my voice low. "What Rachel asked about, could you make me a copy of the request she submitted?" He hesitated, then nodded. "For you? Of course." 10 minutes later, I walked out with a copy of Rachel's transfer request, another attempt to strip me of what Robert and I had built. That night, I taped it into my notebook and wrote, "Direct evidence of intent. Rachel seeking financial control. Their greed is undeniable." Michael came by the next day. He stood in the doorway, his hands stuffed into his pockets, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, you've been making things difficult," he muttered. I stared at him. "Difficult?" "Yes. Rachel says people are whispering. That you're telling lies. Do you have any idea what that's doing to us?" I set my teacup down slowly. "Michael, everything I've said has been true. If you're worried about appearances, perhaps you should change your behavior." His face flushed red. "Why are you doing this? We're trying to help you." "Help me?" I whispered, my voice trembling with fury. "By stealing my house? By forging my name? By abandoning me on a dirt road after your father's funeral?" The words sliced through the air like knives. Michael flinched but didn't deny it. He just turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I sat in the silence, my hands shaking. Then I opened my notebook and wrote, "Michael cornered. Did not deny. Next step, prepare public confrontation. Exposure must be undeniable." That evening, I stood in front of Robert's photograph on the mantel. His steady eyes seemed to look right through me. "I'm close, Robert," I whispered. "They won't get away with this." The fire crackled, warm against my face. I wasn't just pulling at threads anymore. I was unweaving their entire tapestry. And soon, the whole town would see the truth. The days grew shorter, the nights colder, but my resolve burned hotter than ever. Every time I walked past Robert's empty chair at the kitchen table, I reminded myself, this wasn't just about me. This was about honoring the man who had sacrificed everything to give Michael the life he had. I couldn't let our years of sweat, tears, and love be stolen so carelessly. The notebook on my lap had grown thick with papers, copies of deeds, financial letters, Rachel's transfer request. Proof of everything. But proof hidden in a notebook was useless. It needed light. It needed witnesses. That chance came sooner than I expected. One Friday morning, Margaret stopped by, her arms full of fresh bread from the bakery. She set the loaves on my counter and leaned in close, her voice low. "Clara," she whispered, "did you hear? Rachel's hosting a holiday party next week. Big one. Inviting half the neighborhood." I raised my eyebrows. "A party? After all the whispers?" Margaret smirked. "She thinks she can smooth things over. Put on another show of wealth and charm. Pretend nothing's wrong." A slow smile spread across my face. "Then that's where the curtain will fall." That night, I wrote across a fresh page. Phase 3, the public reckoning. Below it, I listed my plan. Gather all evidence in a single folder. Have Hank and Margaret ready as witnesses. Wait for Rachel's party, maximum audience. Reveal forged deed and financial proof calmly, undeniably. Reclaim dignity. I underlined the last step twice. The following days, I busied myself with preparations. I spent hours copying documents at the library, ensuring that even if one set was destroyed, another would remain. Hank helped me buy a small lockbox from the hardware store, where I placed the originals. "Insurance," I explained, and he nodded in approval. At night, Margaret and I rehearsed how it might unfold. "You'll need to stay calm," she advised, sipping her tea. "If you lose your temper, they'll say you're just a bitter old woman." "I won't," I promised. "I'll let the papers speak." Michael came by once during that week, unannounced. I opened the door to see him standing on the porch, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets, his eyes darting nervously. "Mom," he began, his voice uneven, "we're worried about you. You've been talking to people, making us look bad." I stared at him, my face steady. "I'm only telling the truth." His jaw clenched. "If you keep this up, Rachel and I will have no choice but to take steps." "Steps," I repeated softly. He shifted uncomfortably. "Legal steps. To have you declared unfit. You'll lose control of everything." For a moment, the cruelty of it all pressed on my chest like a weight. My son. My only son. threatening me with the law as if I were some stranger. But then I realized what it meant. They were afraid. I met his eyes, my voice sharp as glass. Michael, you've already stolen enough from me. But mark my words, what you've done in the dark will be dragged into the light. He flinched, then turned and walked quickly down the steps, muttering. I watched him go, my hands trembling. Then I picked up my notebook and wrote. Michael threatened legal action. Fear evident. They sense exposure. Must strike soon. The night of the party arrived. Rachel's house glittered with Christmas lights, their glow casting false warmth against the cold December air. Cars lined the street, and laughter drifted from inside. I stood at the edge of the driveway, my leather notebook tucked under my arm, my breath clouding in the winter night. Beside me, Hank adjusted his scarf, his jaw set. Margaret slipped her arm through mine. We're here with you, she said firmly. I nodded, drawing strength from them. We stepped inside, greeted by the smell of cinnamon and wine. The living room was crowded with neighbors in festive sweaters, sipping from delicate glasses and nibbling hors d'oeuvres. Rachel floated among them in a red velvet dress, her smile dazzling, her laugh too loud. Michael trailed behind her, his face stiff, his eyes avoiding mine. Clara! Rachel exclaimed, spotting me. I'm so glad you came. Her tone was saccharine, her eyes sharp. Wouldn't miss it, I said softly. The evening unfolded with forced cheer. Rachel boasted about their plans for the future, glossing over the whispers that still lingered. Michael made stilted conversation, his laugh brittle. I waited. I sipped my tea slowly, watching, biding my time. When the moment came, it was almost too easy. Rachel stood near the fireplace, glass raised, thanking everyone for coming. We are so blessed, she gushed. This year has been challenging, but we're stronger than ever. And soon, we'll be starting fresh in a home that truly fits us. My stomach tightened. There it was, the lie. I stepped forward, my voice carrying clearly through the room. Funny, I said, I wasn't aware I'd agreed to give up my home. The room fell silent. Every head turned. Rachel blinked, her smile faltering. Clara, let's not. But I pressed on, pulling the folder from my notebook. Since you're speaking of blessings, perhaps we should share the truth. I laid the papers on the coffee table with deliberate care. Here is the deed to my home, altered with a forged signature. Here are the bank notices you've been hiding. And here, I held up Rachel's transfer request, is proof you tried to move my accounts into your name. Gasps rippled through the room. Neighbors leaned in, eyes wide, murmurs rising. Rachel's face drained of color. Michael stiffened, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. You can say what you like about me, I continued, my voice steady, but you will not steal the life Robert and I built with our hands. Not while I'm alive. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Margaret stepped forward, her voice strong. I can confirm what Clara says is true. She showed me these documents weeks ago. Hank added, and I was with her when Robert was in the hospital. She could not have signed that deed. The crowd erupted in whispers. Rachel stammered, This is all a misunderstanding. Is it? One neighbor asked sharply. Because it looks a lot like fraud. Another shook her head. After everything Clara's done for you, this is how you treat her? Rachel's hands trembled, her face red with humiliation. Michael's shoulders sagged under the weight of every eye on him. I stood tall, the folded flag clasped against my chest. For the first time since Robert's death, I felt strong. But this wasn't the end. No, the final strike still waited. That night, back in my own house, I sat by the fire with Hank and Margaret. My notebook lay open on my lap, the word exposure underlined 3 times. They won't recover from this socially, Margaret said. But you need more than shame, Clara. You need protection. I nodded slowly. Yes. Tomorrow, I take this to the police. And then to a lawyer. Hank leaned forward. You're doing the right thing. They'll regret the day they tried to steal from you. I closed my notebook with a firm snap. They already do, I whispered. The morning after Rachel's glittering party fell apart, the town was buzzing. I didn't have to leave the house to know it. Whispers traveled quickly in our small community. By noon, Margaret called just to say, Clara, you've turned the tide. Everyone's talking, and no one's on their side. But shame alone wasn't enough. Rachel and Michael could still twist, deny, manipulate. Shame was a shadow, easily hidden if no one held up a lantern. I needed something permanent. That's why I found myself at the county sheriff's office that afternoon, my folder of documents clutched tight in my arms. The sheriff, a graying man named Daniels whom I'd known since he was a boy, looked up from his desk. His brows shot up when he saw me. "Mrs. Wallace. I'm so sorry about Robert. What brings you here?" I sat down, laying the folder between us. My hands were steady as I opened it. "Sheriff, I need to report fraud. And I need your word you'll take it seriously." He leaned forward, flipping through the papers. His eyes narrowed as he compared signatures, the dates, the notary record. "This is a serious allegation, ma'am. Are you saying your son forged your name to steal your house?" I met his eyes, my voice firm. "That's exactly what I'm saying." Daniel sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You understand, this'll tear your family apart." I clutched the folded flag tighter in my lap. "Sheriff, they already did that when they left me on a dirt road after my husband's funeral." His jaw tightened. He nodded. "I'll have a detective open an investigation immediately." Leaving the station, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief. Fear because I had crossed the point of no return, there was no taking this back. Relief because finally, someone with authority would hold Michael accountable. That evening, Hank came over to sit with me by the fire. I told him everything. He nodded approvingly. "Good. They'll be cornered now. No more pretending." I looked at Robert's photograph on the mantel. "I'm not just doing this for me, Hank. I'm doing it for him. For everything he worked for." Hank patted my hand. "And for yourself. Don't forget that." The investigation moved quickly. Within a week, detectives contacted me for a statement. They visited the notary listed on the deed, who admitted he had never actually witnessed me sign. It had been arranged by Michael. The bank provided copies of Rachel's transfer request, complete with her signature. It was undeniable. And when Daniels himself came by to update me, his expression was grim. "Mrs. Wallace, I won't lie. This is going to end badly for them. Fraud, forgery, attempted financial exploitation of an elder, it won't be swept under the rug." I nodded slowly. "Then justice will finally be done." The real moment of revenge came 2 weeks later, in the courtroom. Rachel had tried to put on her best, her hair curled, her dress sharp, pearls gleaming. Michael wore a dark suit, his face pale but defiant. They still thought they could charm or intimidate their way out of this. I sat across from them, my notebook closed in my lap, Hank and Margaret at my side. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The lawyers began their arguments, presenting the documents, the forged signatures, the bank requests. Each piece was like another stone stacked on the wall against Michael and Rachel. At one point, Rachel stood and tried to argue. "She's old, confused, grieving. She doesn't know what she's saying." I rose slowly, my voice calm but carrying through the room. "Confused? Grieving? Perhaps. But not blind. And not weak." I held up the folded flag in my hands. "This is the flag they gave me at my husband's funeral. I was still clutching it when my son abandoned me on a dirt road. If I can remember that, I can remember the truth. And the truth is, they tried to steal everything I had left." The courtroom was silent. Rachel sat down, her face pale. Michael kept his eyes on the floor, unable to look at me. The judge's decision was swift. The forged deed was nullified. Ownership of the house was restored solely to me. The matter of criminal charges was left to the county, but I knew enough. Michael and Rachel would face investigations, maybe even indictments. As I left the courthouse, a cold wind whipped through the square, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Hank and Margaret walked on either side of me, their presence steady. "You did it," Margaret whispered. I nodded. "No. They did it to themselves. I only showed the world." Back home, I lit a fire and settled into my chair. Max, the dog they had once left me to care for, curled at my feet. I scratched behind his ears, whispering, "Looks like it's just us now, boy." On the mantel, Robert's photo caught the firelight. I lifted the folded flag toward it. I kept my promise, Robert. They didn't win. They'll never win. I opened my notebook one last time and wrote across the page. Final entry, revenge complete. House restored. Dignity intact. Son and daughter-in-law exposed. Lesson delivered, you cannot discard a woman who has already survived everything. I closed the notebook, set it aside, and let the fire warm my face. Michael had thought he could end me by leaving me on that lonely dirt road. But all he had done was set me on the path to my greatest victory. And now I would spend the rest of my days in peace, free of their greed, free of their cruelty, free at last.